think queerness comes with an ethical and ideological commitment to argue against all forms of oppression.
Unfortunately, one of the struggles I've had is that I've always had to downplay how much I enjoy my sexuality. Because bad girls like sex, bad girls court men, bad girls have multiple partners.
How can you willingly love somebody who's oppressed you? You are very aware of the fact that you are also dating your oppressor as a queer person, especially as a gay man. Sometimes I tell someone that, I fully resonate when women say I hate all men, because I said, yes, all men are trash.
I'm Leeza Mangaldas, and this is Love Matters. What's it like to be sexually and romantically involved with men? Me, a thus far heterosexual woman, and my guest, an out and proud gay man, are going to be comparing notes today on what it's like to love men. Anish Gawande is a man of many talents. He's a writer, a translator, the director of the Darshiko Fellowship, an interdisciplinary arts residency, the founder of Pink List India, which is India's first archive of politicians who are supportive of LGBTQ plus rights. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He studied intellectual history and public policy at Oxford.
Was certified public intellectual.
Exactly. One of the most eligible young men I know. So Anish, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Leeza. So excited to finally meet you in person.
I know.
And to have this conversation that is going to be comparing notes that we should have been doing a long time ago.
Internet friends for too long. It's so nice to finally meet. To me, one of the first things that strikes me that might have been a bit different when it comes to loving men is that as a straight woman, it was assumed that that is who I'm going to love. Whereas perhaps for you, you had to kind of tread tenderly around even asserting that you love men at first, right? And I read in an interview where you said that because you have a political ambitions, you had to think about the cost that
Absolutely.
Might bear, right, coming out. So what was that like for you before we dive in? Just because I'm such a fan of your work as well.
Thank you very much. Look at you digging up old interviews. But I think it's true that when you're queer, you know that you're queer long before you come out. So I think I knew I was gay from when I was in the 5th standard. And I think what was really difficult was knowing that you're gay and knowing that it doesn't augur well for any ambitions that you have in other aspects of your life. So I was always very keen to work in politics or be a diplomat or work in the IAS. And to me, it was just impossible that the two could coexist. So for the longest time, I was very aware that I was gay, but I was also so convinced that it would completely hamper any aspirations that I had that I stayed in the closet voluntarily. And this reached a point of almost comic magnitudes when I moved to New York City, and I was in college in New York City, and arguably the most queer-friendly place on this planet, and I was still in the closet. And it took a while. There's a long story behind that, but when I did come out, for the longest time, I said that I have to choose one over the other. So when I came out, I said, well, I'm not coming back to India. I'm going to stay on in New York City until I got a phone call right before I graduated from Milind Deora, who I'd volunteered with, who said, come run my campaign. And I said, but I'm in New York City and I'm gay. And he said, so I said, okay. And that was it. So, I think those are considerations that are hard, but it's that initial hoop of knowing what is important to you that makes the difference. Absolutely. And after that, it's not smooth sailing, but it does get better.
And you are being the change, as it were. I love you in your Neta outfit that's been queered up. I love it.
So Leeza, honestly, you're seeing this outfit for what it is, but below it is my Netaji costume. Because this is what I wear day in, day out. And the jacket gets added on when I have to meet fancy, fabulous people like you to do these wonderful podcasts. So, you queer your workplace little by little.
I see the socks.
Because there's a story, right? So when I came back to India after 4 years in the US, I was thrown straight into the wilderness to work with the Maharashtra Congress on their Jana Sangharsh Yatra. And I had to go to Ichalkaranji, to Pathardi, to parts of the state that I'd never been to before. And my biggest concern was I didn't have a wardrobe. So I said, what do I wear? And so I was like, I can't wear this starched white kurta with those pants and like rubber flip-flops and like, no. So I was like, okay, now I need to do something. So then there was this little kurta, which is slightly translucent here. There are colorful socks. There were brown Oxfords and a briefcase. And it became quite fun. And initially eyebrows were raised. But I think my biggest victory was when a politician on the campaign trail, who had been a bit nasty in the beginning, towards the end was like, can you give me a tailor's number? And I was like, you know what?
Yes.
You know what? Here you go. Here you go.
I love it.
So you have fun while doing it. It's not easy, but
thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's get into the juicy stuff, since we are here to compare notes on what it's
Correct.
like to love men. As a heterosexual woman, there's a lot of contradiction to the fact that you love men. You love this group that has historically and systemically oppressed you, Yeah. There's so much misogyny built into heterosexuality that I think for a lot of women, there's like a dissonance. Like, I love this person, and yet what he represents is everything that stood in my way. And that still makes me feel small. And that still conditions how I'm expected to behave, right? It's like coded into heterosexuality. Misogyny is coded into heterosexuality. And I wonder whether, to some extent, heterosexuality as the default also codes roles within queer relationships, just because it's so pervasive. Like there's this idea that even women see themselves through the male gaze.
Yeah.
Do you think that queer people, to some extent, are still having to kind of model gender roles the way heterosexual couples do, where there's like a more dominant person and a more submissive person, and someone who's more in charge of let's say finances versus the home? These tend to be very rigid amongst men and women.
It's interesting that you asked that, because one, queer theory borrows a lot from Black feminist theory on this matter in particular, because this is the question Black women in America face after emancipation. How can you willingly love somebody who's oppressed you? And there's a lot of phenomenal literature on the issue, which I think then bleeds into queer theory about what you do in these sort of dynamics where you are in a relationship that is queer, but you are in an environment that is so pervasively heteronormative, right? So do you then start seeing yourself, as you said, in those lenses? For one, I think you are very aware of the fact that you are also dating your oppressor as a queer person, especially as a gay man, right? Because you have been bullied by men before. You've been you've been through that sort of toxic masculinity that forces you into the closet. And you're now sort of opening up to the idea of dating men who come with all of that baggage. So sometimes I tell someone that, I fully resonate when women say I hate all men, because I said, yes, all men are trash. And then someone's like, but you're a man. And I said, yes, I hate myself, darling. That we've established a long time ago. But, in a more fun way, I think it's true. You have to learn how to navigate those settings differently. What is the advantage with queerness, though, is that you get to have fun while doing it. So you get to break these stereotypes because they exist in the first place. Or, there are friends of mine who lean into them. They say, you know what? I actually like this. I want somebody to be like the person taking care of the house and taking care of who is going to decide what is getting cooked tonight. And I want to be the one doing the more practical aspects. And the best part is you can confuse people because that might not correlate at all to what you do in bed with each other. So you get to have that sort of dynamic.
It's nice when there's a deliberateness and choice, right? Yeah. To who gets to play what role, as opposed to it being enforced, which is so often the case unfortunately, in heterosexual relationships where there's prescribed roles and you must follow those roles. So the question of disrupting them is it doesn't even arise.
Absolutely.
You're the good wife who stays at home and he's the good husband who goes to work. And it's like, so if you disrupt that model, there's something deviant,
100%.
I really think we should queer heterosexuality as well.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond the couple, right? So, it's so funny. I've just redone my bathroom, which has been a 3-month-long project, which has truly been, if anyone asks me, what have you been doing in Delhi? I'm like, I've been redoing my bathroom. I was in Okhla yesterday buying stone, and Okhla is far. But now that it's all been redone, It's got a lot of shelves and spaces that need to be filled with stuff. I have no idea how to organize anything. And so I have a former lover who's now become a very dear friend who's coming to town on Monday. And I was like, listen, how good are you at organizing things? He's like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I was like, okay, like Monday, you're like spending 3 hours organizing this closet.
I love it.
So how do you also queer sort of the idea of love, of the idea of relationships to a way where you're like, you know, we're going to create families of choice. We're going to create chosen families that do the work because you're not competent at doing that work.
It is wonderful if we can create structures of support and rely on people we've loved, right? I think another really unfortunate aspect of how heterosexual couples tend to view love is one at a time, and then you have to like, and then this is the worst person ever. Like, don't talk to your ex. They, you know, if it doesn't work out, that person must be set aside and forgotten, and or even worse, exacted revenge upon. Or, you know,
you have a division of the friend group.
This idea of like fidelity, monogamy, possessiveness, and then I think, you know, being really bad with dealing with rejection or heartbreak, as opposed to thinking of the opportunity you have here where you loved each other. That's a special role to play in someone's life. And why not treasure this person, even if they don't fit into your life as a lover anymore?
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned an ex, but do you think perhaps gay men have figured that out a bit better than straight men?
No. I don't think most gay men have figured it out. I think the rest of the queer community does far better than the gay men, who sort of, I think, are the last bastions or the primary bastions of heteronormativity. What seem to be getting married. I'm like, who is there to marry? First find them married. Who am I going to marry, even if I could marry? So I think there's a way in which you adopt these roles almost unknowingly, right? I think I've had the privilege of having friends, of having mentors, of having professors who've helped me sort of unpack these things, and they haven't happened all together, right? It's not like I came out and suddenly I've broken free from the shackles of heteronormativity or even toxic masculinity. I think it's a process of unlearning that continues, which is why for me, I think I'm a big believer in something called radical complicity. I think for me, it's been really useful to acknowledge that the ways I think, the ways I act are already deeply flawed, and to acknowledge them as such and work on them, and not to say that radical complicity is a way of saying that I take no responsibility for my actions or for my prejudices or for my biases, but to acknowledge that I come with them and they're not an indicator of my own value or my worth. And that they are a product of how I've been shaped. And now I have to like go beyond them. And if I have multiple chances of doing that when someone's pointed it out, then that's a problem. But until then, knowing that this is a journey, that I still have lots of sort of heteronormative associations about like what a relationship should look like, etc., and so do many others. But sometimes having that conversation is the first step to being like, Acha, this doesn't really make sense. And once you reach that point, I think it's easy to go beyond and invent and imagine.
And what do you imagine?
What do I imagine? So I told this to somebody. I was like, given that I travel so much right now, I said we must go back to traditional seafarer notions. And I want a man in every port. So I want to be...
I want a man in every port as well.
Just like sort of like this little waif who like moves around, and then there's a lover everywhere. And all the lovers are equal because I only spend so much time with each of them. And then nobody's asking you like, why haven't you returned my calls? Because I'm like, I was out at sea. Can't respond to phone calls. So my thing is like, how does one create a relationship where I'm perfectly okay with not talking to you for 3 months? And
would you be okay?
I'm fully okay because I have forgotten you for 3 months if I'm doing something more important.
What if you're not doing something important in that?
Then I'll be with you, no.
What if they're busy?
Then that's a problem. That's why man in every port, because then when you're there only for 3 days, everyone makes time for you. Which is why I also I live in Delhi now and I'm from Bombay, and I love going back to Bombay now because I feel so important.
Yeah.
Because I'm there for 3 days and everyone's like, we must meet, and they'll clear out their schedules for me, and I love that.
What about living together?
You know, this is my most controversial hot take. I have always maintained that I can never live with a partner because my kitchen and my living room are sacred spaces. So it's not that I want different bedrooms. In fact, I would much rather we sleep in the same bedroom
But kick them out in the morning.
But open out into different parts of the house. So, people have shared bathrooms between two bedrooms. I'd much rather have a shared bedroom with a separate living room and kitchen on one side and a separate living room and kitchen on the other side.
So model of kinship where living together does not have to be how families are structured.
Where sleeping together does not have to mean living together.
Where sleeping together.
I definitely want to sleep with you. Both in the literal sense and beyond.
Yeah.
But I do not want
to be coexisting all day in the same space.
Correct. I want to then go to my living room couch and watch it, and you can come there.
So we need very big houses, basically.
No, it's the same size house. Yeah, why people have 3-bedroom houses? I'm saying 1-bedroom house, but 2 living rooms and 2 kitchens. That's all.
So let's talk about where we meet people. I think that the gay bar has this sort of iconic place in the cultural construction of, I feel like, how gay relationships form and stuff. I think unfortunately for women, there's a lot of trepidation around meeting a new man because your safety is something you're so overwhelmingly conscious of. So it's something that I wish was more joyful, but it's often something that's layered with fear. Is that something that you experience as well, or would you say that sites of particularly, locations that do mark themselves out as queer spaces alleviate some of that fear?
I think in many ways the gay bar is a site of sort of radical possibility, right? Because in most spaces it exists as an oasis of calm amidst all of the chaos around you. So one of my favorite TV shows in the world is Queer as Folk, the American version, because everyone is prettier there. But there's this club called Babylon, and everyone's there. And it's sweaty, and it's hot, and it's amazing. And everyone then goes back to their normal lives where queerness is being discriminated against, where the AIDS crisis on the horizon, where your workplace can't know that you're gay. And I think the gay bar acquires that sort of mythic resonance because it becomes almost this sanctuary. I don't know if it holds that same connotation in many parts of the world today. I think Delhi I really enjoy because there is a gay bar here, Depot 48, that's quite lovely. New York, I don't think so anymore. I think the gay bar sort of, in a strange
Everywhere's
way,
a gay bar.
Everywhere's a gay bar, right? And then you sort of wonder, what does that mean? And it's particularly hard because you know what that means for you back in India. And so coming out to me in New York was harder than coming out in India because in many ways, everyone had already come out in New York. So I didn't have anyone to look up to or be like, let's compare notes and be like, what have you struggled with? Particularly because I was at a private university in New York City. Those are sort of demographics that are different. Whereas in India, I had so many amazing mentors, particularly older men, gay men, who sort of were like, this is how you come out to your parents, this is how you navigate friendships. And so the gay bar as a space for meeting people acquires that mythic resonance where things are really difficult in other spaces. With the advent of apps, I think the gay bar has become a more sanitized space. It's a space where you go to socialize, but not necessarily as the only place that you go to meet people. And it comes with its own problems. So I think the gay bar is, of course, wonderful, but it's also a place of immense fat phobia. It's a space sometimes and very often of femphobia. It's a space where there are cliques based on caste, on class, based on religion. And so I think you have different problems, but certainly a feeling of more safety than you would at a straight bar, particularly as a cis woman.
And do you think that the apps also take with them some of these sort of social prejudices or biases?
100%. So this is what, right? I think the challenge is, and this is where I make the distinction between being gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans and being queer, right? I think queerness comes with an ethical and ideological commitment to argue against all forms of oppression. Being gay doesn't. And you're not expected to be queer. I think it's a journey that I would most certainly prefer everyone goes on and towards a destination that we would all like to achieve, which is a more equal and just world. But when you're gay or you're lesbian or you're bisexual or you're transgender, you're coming with all of the prejudices that come with other parts of your identity. You're coming with prejudice along the line of caste, class, religion, race, ethnicity, and you bring those to these spaces as well. And it's a process of unlearning that involves sometimes being quite direct about certain forms of behavior not being allowed. For example, apps need to do better at not allowing racist messaging in your bio, for example. And that should be policed. But desire is such a difficult thing to police otherwise. What are you going to do when someone doesn't respond to your message on an app? It's not very evident, but you know that it's because you're Black in the US or because you come from a different caste background in India.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned body positive, a certain, I suppose, predisposition for a very usually thin, able-bodied, Eurocentric-looking sort of ideal, unfortunately, seems to also be something that on the apps becomes so. You're looking at pictures, who are you swiping on? Is it really just personal preference, or are there factors at play that condition who you are taught to see as desirable? I think women feel a lot of pressure to look a certain way, right? Or at least within heterosexual dynamics, there tends to be the idea that the woman must put in the effort to look a certain way, because a woman, that's part of what gives her value, right? A woman must be beautiful and a man must be rich. These are like the unsaid codes of desirability and how it's constructed in heterosexual dynamics. And I wonder whether some of that is also present. Like, do you
100%.
think...
We take on both.
Yeah.
The man must be hot
and rich, right?
Correct. So you have to be both. And that's a big problem, right? I think body positivity is very difficult within the gay community because so much of the content that you consume is so sort of fatphobic, right? And there is an image of the ideal, like, male body that is pervasive, and people have these preferences that reflect upon the apps, but also in other engagements. And listen, this is a self-reflexive process. I have to think about this while swiping, right? These are not prejudices that are not inherent to me. It's very difficult to point fingers. And this is
radical complicity.
It's radical complicity because, I know myself making these decisions when I'm swiping on Tinder, and then I have to sit back and be like, okay, like, what does this mean? And many times that's involved me saying that, actually, maybe that means not going on the apps. Because I see myself doing that a lot more on the apps than if I met somebody in person. Because I'm so tuned to because I'm making a decision in 30 seconds, right? Not even a few seconds.
Yeah. No, I've never actually used an app.
No.
I've never used an app. I've only met the people I've been with in real life.
But all the people I've been with on apps, but this is also where it's not that all apps are bad. I remember when I was on Grindr in India, when I just come back for the first time after coming out, and I was like, oh my God, like, if I put my picture on there, it's going to be on the front page of the Times of India. Megalomaniac from that type of thing.
Love it.
And I was like, oh my God, what is going to happen, etc. But I went on the apps. And on the free version, you could reach the end of the city. And this is like 10 years, not even 10 years ago. And it was really sweet because it almost became like a community space where the first boy I ever dated, I met through Grindr, and we went on a date where we sat on Marine Drive and looked at the moon.
That is so sweet.
Which is impossible to think of now. I think there's now too many people on Grindr. There's a very set role for the app, and you're probably meaning for a hookup. But other worlds are possible. These apps can be generative spaces. Absolutely. But we have to reimagine them. And I think it's hard work. It's not easy. You're conditioned to use it a certain way. You're also busy. You want certain things in life. But yeah, meeting in person, I wish there were more spaces for that.
I guess I came of age at a pre-app time. I'm 33. I feel is that young or old?
That's
is that
very
funny?
Young, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
But you're, I don't know, 10 years younger?
27, not that.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, 10 years younger. I'll be 10 years younger if you want me to be.
So yeah, I feel like back when I've also been in long relationships. Oh, in all sorts of places.
No, now you have to share. I've shared so much. You can't not give me
I am the
anything.
interviewer.
No.
And you are the interviewee.
No, this is, what is it called? Comparing notes.
That's
So
right.
you
That's
please,
right. I met a lawyer at a police station. Anyway, this is really not about my life.
You know, half the people I know in relationships currently met them at protests over the past few years. That's like, never thought of it that way, but... So lawyer at police station.
I met my current partner. I've been a TV presenter before starting all of my my online content, and so one of the people I met was someone I met who I was interviewing. I mean, interesting people.
I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start a podcast. Indian Express, please note. Please give me a podcast.
It was
so I can
not
call lots
for the
of people.
record. It was not.
I'm calling lots of
my
guests.
stint
So
at the
this is
Indian
how
Express.
I find my next partner.
You're making me look so bad.
Not for here. But I'm saying when you were I want to do it with the Indian Express.
You do your public intellectual
I will do
show.
the public intellectual
Okay, I love how you've turned Love Matters into Coffee with Karen. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Anyway.
You only said that
Leeza
started off with this. The reason that I am here is because Leeza has promised that this will help me find somebody. Because I am very single. So this is in pursuit of that, because otherwise all these serious questions...
I find it hard to believe that you are not a man with many, many suitors.
I find it very hard to believe too. I don't know what to do. Such is life.
Okay. Well, speaking of though, I feel like as a woman, unfortunately, one of the struggles I've had is that I've always had to downplay how much I enjoy my sexuality. Because bad girls like sex, bad girls court men, bad girls have multiple partners. You know what I mean? To just be at ease in your sexuality and your body, to want to have fun, to see it as fun is almost sort of a transgression around the codes of what it means to be a good woman. And I think so many people do not have the luxury to publicly transgress those codes, even if they wanted to, because the stakes are just too high. It means losing your emotional, financial, and various other forms of structure, stability, support in your life for many women, right? To even just admit to liking sex, or to have sex outside of marriage, or to wear something, wear a bikini, or not even just wear whatever you like because you want to, and that's what makes you feel good. It's at so many levels such a process of downplaying, masking, disguising anything to do with your sexuality as a woman, and I wonder whether, hopefully, I'm sure it's difficult being a gay person in a homophobic country or world. World. There's many, many struggles. But do you think that within the ecosystem of fellow gay men, at least, is there a greater acceptance and tolerance and just normalcy around being, let's say challenging the idea of monogamy or the idea of virtue in some sort of single partnership equation, and just being more expressive and free with sexuality? Or is that a stereotype that doesn't work?
I would have hoped so, but I think again, right, I think it depends. Gay men will have a very different... If you were to take a survey of gay men, you would get a very different answer if you were to take a survey of queer women or trans men or trans women, because these are sort of communities that are subcultures of their own that come with the same amount of baggage, right? So again, I mentioned, Queer as Folk is a very common show that a lot of people my age watched growing up, or slightly older than me as well, which means there's a generation of gay men for whom sort of sexual liberation is integral to their gay identity. So, this idea of settling down with only one person and being in a monogamous, committed relationship with no other partners is alien to them. But that's not the case for a lot of other gay men who come with a very different sort of cultural background to queerness, or to their gayness, or to their gay identity. So I think it really depends upon what you were socialized on. And I think that's also what makes it so much harder, because these are all roles that you are inventing for yourself and norms that you're creating for yourself, which means that it's very hard to find somebody whose norms are the same as yours. And very hard to then also be on the same wavelength. The good part is that you get to have conversations around those issues. But on the policing of desire, I think we're witnessing a fairly sort of concerning re-emergence of this policing of desire, right? I think the past few years have been ones where we've been able to get comfortable with the idea of, say, like a live-in relationship, or with the idea of sex before marriage, or with the idea of having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And it's in our mainstream discourse, it's been in Bollywood, it's been in the popular media, and you're seeing, and I worry very much so, a sort of return to a form of conservatism that is far more dangerous, that knows the other side and still chooses to enforce a certain moral code on others. And I think you're seeing that across sexuality. I think you're seeing that as
across
this
geography as well.
Across geography. It's not just India, right? This is sort of, I mean, internet culture is like trad culture, like proudly trad. There's really concerning developments. And we can't, again, right? I can't police this. I can't tell you that what you're doing is wrong. And I can't put you in jail for it. I have to convince you otherwise. And I think the job of so many of us is to emphasize that having multiple sexual partners, or having sex before marriage, or not being monogamous isn't about having more fun. It's about really shaking the foundations of a system that actually hurts you, right? It's about like realizing for yourself more than for anybody else that it doesn't fit what you want with your life. And I think that's where you get to a point where you say that you're very welcome to be monogamous. I do not mind monogamy, but you're also welcome to not be monogamous. And that's a choice for people to make. And that's not something that should be foisted upon them. But it is one that they should make knowingly, which is, similar to the conversation we just had around gender roles being flipped in heterosexual relationships. It's not that these gender roles are bad or the roles themselves are bad. Somebody has to do the dishes and somebody has to cook. And ideally, it's not going to be the same person. But it doesn't need to be assumed who's cooking and who's doing the dishes. Once you have that conversation, you can decide, even as a woman, to cook, and your partner can decide to do the dishes. But you've made that choice consciously and without pressure. Exactly. And we're seeing a reversal of that, which I'm concerned about.
Me too. Ooh, I want to ask you also about what you consider red flags and green flags when looking for a partner or even within a relationship.
There are no red flags. You walk straight into all of them. So I think I love this line, and it's on my Hinge profile as well, that it's the one thing that I look out for is in a person is if you're kind even when no one is watching. Right?
Big
and I think
flag.
it's those small instances where you don't need to be nice.
Right? When you're nice to people who have less power than you, who you have nothing to gain from.
Exactly. And when nobody else is watching you, be nice to them. It's not like, like you're volunteering at some NGO and taking photos with all of these kids who come from a underprivileged background. No. But it's when you're doing the small things that you wouldn't necessarily have had to do otherwise that are instinctive. And if your gut instinct is to be nice, that's the biggest green flag. I think red flags are too many. Do we have another podcast? And Leeza and me is going to be on red flags and men.
Top three red flags.
Top three red flags. If they spend time on the first date criticizing the way you look. If someone's pointing out, oh, why are you wearing that? Big red flag. Run away. Second red flags is hard.
I mean, any hint of a tendency for violence is a big red flag. I run.
That's so important though, because I think, and this I see with friends who've been in relationships where violence has been a concern, and domestic abuse in particular, we all think that it can't happen to us. But it's insidious in that it sort of weaves its way in, and once you're there, even if you're the most woke person or you know everything about the world, you've read it all, it's very hard to get out. So that's a very good red flag, hints of violence.
I think also a lack of accountability. If they don't say that, they don't do what they say they'll do, or just stand you up. If I'm stood up, I'm not meeting that person again.
Listen, I have the worst ADHD, which means I have no organizational skills. So I preface everything. I'm I will be late.
But at least you say that.
Correct. Now, so I will
text 15 minutes before leaving also. No.
Yeah.
If you then say, yes, you're coming, and you don't come, I'm not going to meet you again.
So I'll tell you
You know what I mean?
I'll tell you this funny story. So this is actually the first boy I ever kissed. So it's actually a phenomenal story to tell.
Oh, tell me.
So I was at college, at Columbia, where we both went. And I had gone to the therapist on campus and very, confidently told her, I need your help to stay in the closet. Because I was like, I have to work in politics and this is getting hard. So you are the therapist, the mental health, Mira mental health will be fixed by staying in the closet. So you help me do that. And she just looked at me and smiled and said, sure. Of course, over the next 3 months, she helped me come out of the closet. But we decided that I could only come out somewhere because remember, Megalomania Times of India front page, I was terrified if I come out where anybody knows me, everyone will know and then that's game over. So he said, why don't we come out somewhere where I know nobody and nobody knows me? And so I applied for this grant from the European Institute for Cultural Power and International Relations, which then allowed me to go to Paris. And so I was working at the Indian Embassy in Paris and at the Press Information and Culture Bureau, which I did barely any work at. I should not say this. I love the Indian Embassy in Paris. But I was working there. There was not much work at the Press Information and Culture Bureau in August, which is when everyone in France was on vacation. And I was there when I started using Grindr for the first time. And I met this lovely boy who said, why don't you come on over and we'll go out to Queen, which is this iconic queer nightclub that used to be on the Champs-Elysees that shut down, like many queer clubs across the world have shut down. And I said, yes, of course, that would be lovely. Anish gets onto the metro fully half an hour late.
Did you tell him?
No, I had forgotten to tell him that I was going to. I was like going to message him. And my phone died. And so I am now 45 minutes late as I get out of this metro station that I'm supposed to get out at. I have no charger. And so I'm like, how do I tell this man? I feel so terrible about like not informing him. My phone is dead, so what do I do? So I find this charging point next to a bus stop where I'm like charging my phone right outside the metro station. And this boy has been cycling round and round this metro station for the past half hour because he's concerned that I haven't responded when I was supposed to be there.
So you found each other.
And we found each other. And it was the sweetest thing. He was like, Bichara, looking for me. And I was like, you are such a darling.
Aww.
And then we went to his house. And then we went to Queen. And then we made out. And then I kissed a boy and I liked it. And then there was no going back. But that was the coming out was like, no, there's no going back into the closet after that.
Amen.
And we're still friends. I meet him every year when I go to Paris, and I make it a point to go as often as I can, just because I think it's a love that's lasted, and we're not romantically involved with each other at all. But it's just such a special bond that's continued.
That is so, so beautiful. And, it made me think of many things. Perhaps to some degree, there is an inequality in the way that men and women see each other. And it goes both ways, where there's this idea of like, I must be, I think for women, the stakes are made to seem like they're very high if it doesn't work out, okay? Because you gave this golden apple of your honor and sexuality to this man and he dumped you. You know what I mean? These ideas of like, somehow there being an exchange, a transaction where the woman gives and the man takes is coded into the way that heterosexual relationships are configured. So even something small as the man being late to the date makes it feel a bit like a very primitive conditioning of like, I gave a little and it was not appreciated, or it was squandered, or it was, do you know what I mean? It becomes personal in a way that actually it shouldn't if you see yourselves as equals. For example, I think if a girlfriend was late, I wouldn't feel so bad, or I wouldn't take it personally in this way. It wouldn't seem like a lack of accountability in the way that it does when a man does that, So to some extent, like what was so beautiful about your story, where he was waiting, you wanted to charge your phone, like you both really did want to see each other. Nobody was mad. Happy when you met, and then had your first kiss, and are still in touch.
That's right.
Right? But there seems to be this equality in the way that you see each other. Men see women as like a conduit for sex, but not always as an equal human being. Is the like very basic gender theory idea around inequality between the sexes.
And I want to push you on that and say that what happened with me was only possible because I was again in a space where I knew nobody and nobody knew me. I did not have the background or the cues that I needed to determine whether I could be late for this or not. He didn't have the cues needed to know what this random man from India who's doing like some random internship at the Indian embassy in France is coming from. Like there was this sort of innocence in not knowing that gets disrupted, because it would happen even in India where, for example, if I was meeting somebody significantly wealthier in Delhi, I would not be late, right? Or them being late, I would feel quite affronted by because they thought that my time could be taken for granted because they're wealthier than I am. Or flip that around, right? Or if you came from a very different caste background, or if you came from a sort of different social strata, or from a sort of different, I think these are sort of dynamics that become so much harder when you know the sort of background of the person who's driving, which is why, man, in every port, your new place, there's a certain, and that's running away from the problem. And I acknowledge that. I think but in these times, running away is sometimes the only sort of solution in the short term. But in the long term, I think these are challenges that need to be addressed. And I think the only way of doing that is being very upfront in that communication and saying that this is unacceptable.
Yeah, I wonder if we can all strive to bring some of the energy of young love in Paris, young and anonymous love in Paris, into all our relationships, where you kind of do everything you can to minimize power differentials, if there is a power differential, at least the impact of that on the way both parties interact. And also
love with kindness.
Love with kindness and equality. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful note to wrap up on, Anish.
How excited.
Because I could sit here and talk for 5 hours. It's probably gone over time already, but this was so much fun.
This was very, very lovely. Thank you so much for having me, and what a fun chat.
Thanks so much, Anish. It's been so much fun chatting. And thank you for tuning into Love Matters, produced by the Indian Express and DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please share it with your friends and family. Please feel free to leave a
like, share, subscribe, and more.
Yes, exactly what he said. Leave a comment. Tell your friends. Email us at lovematters@dw.com if you feel like. Till next.
I'll be reading all the emails. Please forward.
Till next time. This is me, Leeza Mangaldas, and I believe love matters.
You're so cute. Yes. Thank you.